Welcome to Spotlight Matthew for today as we continue to investigate this last week of Jesus' life found in chapters 21 through 28. And we see that in chapters 21 through 23, there is a climax to the conflict between Jesus and the religious officials and leaders in Jerusalem. And Matthew artfully has just given us three parables of Jesus that were aimed and geared to criticize the really religious people there. The parable of the two sons, the parable of the wicked tenants, the parable of the wedding feast. But then, strategically, I think, and intentionally, Matthew now will turn and give us three episodes in which the really religious folks set their sights at Jesus and aim to undermine his authority, his power, and his teaching. And they're seeking to do this because they figure if they can discredit Jesus, then they will have alleviated the tension and the potentially volatile situation that he could present as the Roman soldiers look on from the fortress Antonia up above down onto the temple court. So you know the Romans are concerned. They see this individual preaching and teaching and the crowds getting larger and larger. And they know that that could be dangerous. And so these leaders are going to attempt to make Jesus look the part of a fool. If they can send their brightest and best guns and take Jesus down in debates or arguments, then indeed Jesus will be discredited and the situation will be resolved. So the first group to come out of these three to Jesus to take him on are those who are the Pharisees or the disciples of the Pharisees, and another group called the Herodians. And we find this in chapter 22, beginning with verse 15. Then the Pharisees went and plotted how to entangle Jesus in his words. And they sent their disciples to Jesus, along with the Herodians, saying, "Oh, teacher, we know you are true, and you teach the way of God truthfully, and you do not care about anybody else's opinion, for you are not swayed by mere appearances. Tell us then, what do you think? Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not?" But Jesus, aware of their malice, said, "Why do you put me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me the coin for the tax." And they brought him a denarius. And Jesus said to them, "Whose likeness and inscription is this?" And they replied, "Caesar's." And Jesus said to them, "Therefore, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." And when they heard this, they marveled, and they left him and went away. Well, why is this a clever trap that they are setting against Jesus? It's because of the two groups that actually come to Christ. On one hand, the Pharisees hated the Roman occupiers, and they felt it was entirely unrighteous and unlawful to pay a cent of tax to those Roman occupiers and the Romans who were indeed squatting on God's land and there on the very verge, the brink of the temple itself. And yet on the other side were the Herodians. The Herodians had decided that the best way to move along is to get along. And so they were willing and indeed thought it wisest to pay taxes to the Romans. And so you have two groups intentionally set up where Jesus is between the proverbial rock and the hard place, the Scylla and the Charybdis. If Jesus says you shouldn't pay taxes to the Romans, then the Herodians are going to be insulted and have their noses out of place. They're going to be disagreeing with Jesus because they think that Jesus is stirring things up when he should be helping the people to get along with the Romans. On the other hand, of course, if Jesus says you should pay taxes, then he will have the very powerful and influential Pharisees to deal with. And so Jesus then gives one of the most famous replies in all of the biblical record. He says, "Hand me over one of the coins that is paid to the Romans, a denarius worth one day's wages." And on that coin is the inscription and the image of whom? Of Caesar, in this case Caesar Tiberius, who was ruling at that time. And of course Jesus says, "Render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and render unto God the things that belong to God." And the people are amazed because Jesus has evaded this trap. He has not succumbed to either side or either group. He simply is saying to them, if indeed this belongs to Caesar, then you should give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. And the Herodians would have been pleased with that. And yet when he says, render unto God the things that belong to God, the Pharisees would have said, indeed, that ought to be and must be our ultimate guiding principle. And so Jesus, indeed, instead of looking the fool, instead of being discredited, shines all the more brightly in his brilliant response that he gives. Well, what's our Christian application for this? Well, by and large, the way that the church has taken this over the centuries is to say that when it is possible, when in good conscience, the Christian can pay taxes as those who are citizens or at least are living in a foreign nation or in a land, they should go ahead and do so. It's perfectly appropriate to render to Caesar that which is Caesar's when it is just and it is right. This is famously demonstrated by St. Augustine in his monumental, his magnum opus called The City of God. We as Christians should strive to be model citizens, the best of citizens, so that people who are not Christians in a society may look to Christians and see them as not a hindrance to their society, but the very best of their society. Good citizens who are attempting to bring about what is best for the land. And this actually echoed the instructions of Jeremiah, that when the Israelites were deported to Babylon in the early 6th century BC, he said, set up shop, build houses, marry, and seek the welfare of that foreign country where you're going. And that would naturally include the paying of taxes. And yet, even though that's the general rule, there are exceptions to the rule in history. And we need look no further than the American Revolutionary War for that. Because the famous clarion call in Boston, Massachusetts was taxation without representation. And that triggered what we know in American history as the Boston Tea Party. So this was a case where Caesar, in this case England and King George, in the eyes of the colonists, were asking to have something rendered to him that didn't belong to him because of the unfair way in which it was being required of them. So, I would like us, though, finally to look at an even greater and deeper lesson that Jesus teaches through this incredible response. He says, but render unto God the things that belong to God. And what are the things that belong to God? Well, Jesus has just asked for a coin and noted the image of Caesar Tiberius on that coin. We look at human beings, and what bears the image of God? We do. Human beings are image bearers. If you are, we are God's coin with God's image stamped upon it. And we are called to render to God what belongs to God. We are to give to God that which has His image and His inscription upon it. And that is human beings made in the imago Dei. So above all, above questions of governments and authorities and paying taxes, Jesus says, you give to God everything that belongs to God. And at the end of the day, you yourself belong to God. I belong to God. We belong to God because we bear His image. So during your devotional time, reread this incredible little episode with Jesus and the religious leaders and claim and own once again with great, great joy that you're made in the image of God and you have the inscription of God upon your life if you've trusted in Jesus Christ, and give all that you are to Him afresh today. At Spotlight Matthew for today, check us out at spotlightgoodnews.com, like us on Facebook, and please do share us with others, and we'll talk to you next time.